It was one of the most controversial chapters of my first book, Conscious Coaching, at least amongst staunch critics who really wanted to take to their keyboards and pepper me with prattle, even though they maybe didn't read it as closely as they should have. The archetypes. And today we are going to discuss what they are not, how they can be misperceived, how they can be used to help you gain a better understanding of human behavior, and regardless of the field or profession you're in, how they can help you as a leader. We are putting this one to bed for a final time because there are so many instances on Twitter or other forms of media where these things were misquoted, and this became such a heated debate with a small coterie of individuals. So I'm happy to have you with me because there's no better medium to discuss this. Now, before we start, I want to thank Momentus, especially my good friend Chris DeSanto, who deserves a shout out of his own. Momentus is not only a world leader in the human performance space with respect to nutritional support and supplementation, but also customer care, and so much of that is led by people like Chris. So whether you have a job in the corporate realm, whether you're a doctor who works extraordinarily long shifts, and thank you, by the way, even though you get little to no sleep, if you're somebody who loves to travel, you're an athlete in any sense of the word, whether professional, casual, or maybe even just on the weekend, Momentus has something for you. It is an absolute mainstay for me whenever I travel, especially their elite sleep, their fish oil, their brain drive, and they focus on research-backed, no-nonsense products for every budget. So you can learn more about them, and I urge you to do so because they've been so loyal to us, so great, and they look at the highest quality ingredients. That's all they source. That's all they use. This is not for bodybuilders, not for meatheads. This is for everybody. LiveMomentus.com, or you can check them out on our partner page, artofcoaching.com/partner. Okay, let's get into this one. Welcome to the Art of Coaching podcast, a show aimed at getting to the core of what it takes to change attitudes, behaviors, and outcomes in the weight room, boardroom, classroom, and everywhere in between. I'm your host, Brett Bartholomew. I'm a performance coach, keynote speaker, and the author of the book, Conscious Coaching. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong student interested in all aspects of human behavior and communication. I want to thank you for joining me, and now let's dive into today's episode. I remember the streets were still slick with the rain from the previous night's downpour. I walked into the hotel, I looked around, and I was absolutely awestruck regarding the level of detail that was etched into the wood and the stone around me. Now, the structure itself, the hotel, was well over 100 years old and had been adorned with a rich variety of symbolism that all really coalesced in a way that told this story of the building, the campus, and the community that supported it. Now, this symbolism was really ironic given what I had been brought there to speak about the next day. I tried to sleep, but many of you know how that goes when you just finish hopping multiple time zones when you're traveling. Though you may have dreams of checking into your hotel and your head hitting the pillow the moment you get into your room, those turn out to be delusions once you actually get there, given the amount of adrenaline that you feel when you're traveling to a new place. You're navigating the airport, you're getting your bags, you're trying to get your bearings. I remember I got my key card and went up to the room. I dropped my bags, and upon pressing the key against the reader on my door, I was greeted with a red light. Declined. No entry. So I jiggled the handle again, tried again, put it up again closer, tried the other side. The third time, we know how this dance goes. So completely dejected, I hoisted my bags over my shoulder, trudged downstairs, smiled at the desk clerk, who, by the way, looked like he needed a nap since it was now nearly 1:30 in the morning. I sighed and I was like, hey, I guess it's one of those nights. My key card doesn't like me and I can't get into the room. I'm sorry to bug you. And this was another poignant example of something we're going to talk about later. Eventually, after he gave me another card, I got settled, I got some sleep, and awoke the next morning as ready as I'd ever be to present, at least. Now, 2 separate organizations had booked me over the course of the next 4 days, just laying out some context here. One of which resided underneath the umbrella of the Department of Defense, right, the DOD, and another was a sporting organization. And it turns out that both parties had somehow gotten their hands on my first book, Conscious Coaching, and they wanted me to speak a little bit more about my model of determinants of human behavior, message tailoring, and archetypes. And I'll be honest about this. When I wrote the book, I had hoped it would cross over into other industries. But what nobody tells you is you can't choose the parts of the book that people tend to gravitate to most. And in this case, aside from the part that detailed my personal story where I was hospitalized, the one that really is the thing that put me on the road we're on as the organization today with Art of Coaching, it was the archetypes that people tended to be drawn to. It was the most polarizing for some reason. Now, a few months prior, I had spoken at Microsoft and with Turner Construction about this very topic. Why? Well, they had reached out saying that they had seen these factors play at various levels of their organization. And their goal was to help figure out, hey, how can we better understand staff differences in personality? We need to do this because they wanted a more adaptable approach to handling organizational communication, something we can all relate to, right? We know that people are different. They come with their own quirks. And sometimes it's hard to make sense of that because we're trying to focus on our job, but people can get in our way. At least that's how we perceive it. Now, those in this case that worked in their product division had their own issues, but they also needed to play nice with those in online services, the business development side of things, servers, tools, devices, construction, and the like. Now, I didn't mind then, nor do I now, that organizations which resided outside of my previous primary profession, strength and conditioning, wanted to dive more deeply into this. It's always fascinating hearing their interpretation, what they deal with. I mean, many of you listening, we have listeners from over 200 countries that dial in. Many of you are in fascinating professions, so we love hearing those problems. And, for the most part, whenever we went into other industries, they got it. We'd do the talk, we'd go into breakouts. There was no debate because they operated on such a global scale with respect to their products, their services, marketing, problem solving, and even scenario planning, that they saw these archetypal patterns really all play out around them. Now, prior to me coming out there, they didn't just have a framework for it, not because I'm smarter or what have you, but they had to stay busy doing the much more important things they were involved in. And I'd learn from them, they learned from me. It was always this tremendous symbiosis. Now, it was the small contingent of those in the performance environment, the very one that I came from, that tended to want to fight about this. And if you followed my work for any amount of time, you know that I was a strength and conditioning coach, still am for 15 years. It's a tremendous profession, but it's one, you can almost liken it to comedy, where in some ages in comedy, I think it's a lot better now. It's more supportive because there's so many more platforms. But when you look at like the golden era of competitive comedy in the 70s and what have you, when people were trying to fight to get on Johnny Carson's couch and make it in comedy, it was like, they had this attitude that every other comedian sucked, or if somebody else was getting laughs that you weren't. So in strength and conditioning, there tends to be this lack of an abundance mindset sometimes. Now, there's many reasons. Part of it is because there's very few jobs that work in professional sport or high-level athletes, and people dramatically underplay the importance of working with kids and other populations. And it's also just because hyper-competitive individuals get in that field and tend to do so sometimes for the wrong reasons. They should get into it because they like managing people and coaching, but sometimes they get into it because they self-identify with a training method or a tactic. So anybody that threatens their beliefs, they can get really up in arms about. And of course, this isn't just strength and conditioning. Many of you listening have this as well, but I'm just trying to paint a picture of, when we went into these organizations, it was kind of like, well, who are you? Are you coming for my job or what have you? Now, I'm not going to embellish here because sometimes I do have a bad habit of making a small percentage of people, in this case, fierce critics of the topic we're talking about today, seem like the majority. It's sort of like when they say you almost need 10 good things to happen for every one bad or negative life event. We all tend to focus more on the negative at times for a variety of reasons that we'll go into in a future podcast. But, the next part of what I'm going to vent about pertains to about 5 to 7% of people's reactions in total. So if we revisit that night in the hotel, for example, the irony was that I prepared to be riddled by members of the DoD client, given their highly analytical and clandestine nature, everything they were involved in. Yet, that in-service couldn't have gone better. They shared a lot of examples. They even helped formulate different approaches, very hands-on. When I visited that sporting organization and met their head strength and conditioning coach, I remember he looked at me, and upon me extending my hand and saying, "Hey, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me in," he cut me off mid-sentence, looked at me as if I was trying to hand him a subpoena, and barked, "Oh, so you're the guy that's going to tell me how to coach 100 plus people at the same time by giving me a bunch of goofy names for him, huh? Great. Tell me how to do it." So the irony here shouldn't be missed. In criticizing this framework he knew little to nothing about, because he admitted hadn't read my book, didn't have the time, what have you, don't care, right? He knew little about this beforehand. He didn't realize that he, through his standoffish demeanor, was displaying a classic archetypical persona himself in that moment. He's a skeptic. He's a hard ass. Pardon my language. There's going to be more of it in this episode. The one that, couldn't make it into the book. And there's many like him, and there's plenty of folks out there that are always going to fight when they feel threatened and what have you. But here was a real issue at play. His boss had brought me in because of this very issue. Here was a coach whose sole duty was to develop those under his leadership through getting to know them better, communicating, teaching at a high level, helping them meet core objectives, which would then help the organization as a whole perform better, right? There's quotes and mottos, all the things that you can imagine in the weight room that are plastered all around, right? Like, be open-minded, challenge yourself, better today than you were yesterday, all the usual stuff. It looks like they just kind of ripped it from every coaching book, what have you. Be open-minded was probably the most unique one. And again, ironic, yet here we were. So over the years, I learned quite a bit about people and their perceptions and how their experiences and personalities shape their expectations and insecurities. So, throughout the time since this book has existed, I hear all kinds of questions on this. So, hey, can you create a manual that tells me and my staff how to best coach each archetype? And I'll talk about what they are in a moment. Hey, do the archetypes apply to parents, coworkers, colleagues, and the like? Hey, people aren't monoliths. You can't label them. Hey, could somebody be more than one archetype? Hey, could you create a standardized questionnaire that helps us do this and what have you? And all these questions are rational, and many of them are well-intentioned, but they can also be well off the mark. And we'll get into this. But what was really scary is when you tell people, in some instances, the answer, it depends, or that, hey, you can't treat people like they're just, little tiny puzzle pieces. And no, there's not going to be a worksheet that tells you how to best communicate with everybody at all times. Why? Well, because communication's a skill. Even if one of us could create this sheet, right, and there's this golden piece of paper that tells you how to interact with everybody perfectly all the time, that is still going to come down to your ability to actually communicate and use that stuff well, to be socially agile. But that's not what many people want to hear. And it makes you think, is it that our increased ease of access to information, has that made us lazy, right? Because when I looked at my primary demographic early on, strength and conditioning, I saw the irony that, these strength coaches, people who often received advanced science-based degrees in subjects such as physiology, biomechanics, motor learning, and other related disciplines, seemingly care enough to understand the interdependent, it depends nature of physical training, right? You can't just create one program and here you go. And that would happen a lot too. I spent a lot of my career working with professional athletes. All of a sudden somebody, would say, hey, can you send my son a program, or can you send me a program over social media? Well, you can't do that. Just like doctors can't blindly prescribe medication. But, these coaches would understand that, yet they expect a binary approach to the complex, messy nature of human interaction and behavior. And that is just laziness. It's laziness. And it also shows how much we need to continue to understand that communication is far more than just soft skills. It is far more than most leadership books would lead you to believe. That stuff doesn't guide you well because it just gives you this one size fits all advice. And many within our field and those like it so desperately want to be able to break down and just systematize their interactions with individuals the same way a doctor would prescribe medication, or somebody would do sets and reps, or an engineer would address the construction of some sort of machine. It's like they don't mind if it's complicated as long as it fits in a model that's easy to recognize, identify, and adapt to. Guys, where is the effort? Where's the work? Where's the love of trying to figure these things out? And more importantly, where is the skill in that? And that shows the issue in priorities. If you're going to nerd out over all the technical aspects of your profession, and you can't sit there and understand, wow, communication's a skill, this is pretty messy, I actually need to practice, whether it's in role-playing scenarios or what have you, learning how to better interact with people outside of the job, we'd be a little bit better off, right? So I've already discussed the flaws of this in online courses and what have you. I'm not going to go on too much because I want to get to the archetypes, but I just want to make it clear, when it comes to being an adaptable communicator, you've got to do the work. Nobody's going to write that book for you. There's never going to be a people playbook that you guys can operate off of. And, the art of coaching, this term, prior to what we're trying to do with it, it was depicted as this ambiguous cliche of warmth and empathy because people didn't really understand that. It's a tough topic to understand. So it's easier to just say, this is what it is. But what you're looking for is fit in any interaction, conducive fit, right? When coaches and leaders of all types, we want to better understand aspects of personality and behavior, right? So we can more effectively motivate, but also so that we can see if these people are fit within our organization or what we're doing. And, but if you were to think of so many different sports teams, duos, or organizations, businesses, whatever that you could name that didn't work out despite them having talent and smart people and all these things, but it was just not a fit, right? They didn't know how to work together. So, it's a deep and detailed thing, and people need to understand that this comes down to a level of self-awareness. Now, to the archetypes themselves, let's reveal this fog, this mist, go behind the curtain. Archetypes are just best thought of as a scaffolding or a general model to help us better key in on an individual's common behaviors. Now, a lot of people, and rightfully so, really the person that gets the credit for archetypes is Carl Jung, right? Born in 1875, died in 1961. He was a Swiss psychiatrist, and he was fascinated by the way societies around the world shared striking similarities, especially as it pertained to myths and symbols and certain behaviors. Now, unlike Jung, I don't believe necessarily that these symbols exist as part of layers of inherited memory that constitute the entirety of the human experience. And I also don't believe that archetypical behaviors exist solely in the subconscious. When you look at the Oxford Dictionary example or phrasing and definition of archetype, it is a very typical example of a certain person or thing, right? So this book is a perfect archetype of the fiction genre, right? That is an example. It uses a sentence. It's an original that's been imitated. If you look at synonyms, you can see typification, prototype, representative, original, pattern, model, standard, mold, embodiment, essence, quintessence, textbook example, paradigm, ideal, idea, or a recurrent symbol or motif in literature, such as mythological archetypes of good and evil. So the gist of this is as societies grew larger and more complex, myths and stories and symbolism helped create and reinforce social order. This is what the author, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote the book Sapiens and others, talks about in his tome. Every culture has its typical beliefs and norms and values that are in flux. But in general, we also see that in every part of the world where there are instances where people, they're brought up with certain standards. They think in certain ways. They want certain things. They observe certain rules. My little boy, I try to think about, okay, he wants this or he wants that toy or he wants to watch this. And if somebody else wants something, he wants it because he views that thing as desirable. These social patterns exist. And ironically, this is a lot of what the favorite buzzword of so many in the corporate setting and the sporting setting as well. Love, when you think of the term culture and how many people use that in their speeches and their books and what have you. Well, that itself is backed in archetypical verbiage. Oh, this place has a toxic culture. This place has an innovative culture. This place has a culture of accountability. These terms themselves conjure general yet specific imagery. They don't tell you everything, but they give you a hint as to what you might expect when you walk in the door. The definition of culture itself, and this is something I talked about on episode 2, way back on episode 2 of the podcast. Man, the audio was so much worse then, and I was still trying to figure out everything. I still have a long ways to go, but in that, we talked about how culture itself is defined as a dynamic process characterized by the, wait for it, shared values, beliefs, expectations, and practices across the members and generations of a defined group. And that comes from Fletcher and Arnold, Sanfu and Bourgeois. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Schein, Scheitenberg, Zuetel. I mean, we're talking about when you think of what you want your culture in your workplace to be, the culture of your family, the culture, any of these things, that itself, when you think of the terms, those are archetypical terms. Now, archetypes can also be associated with many kinds of behavioral and emotional patterns. The ones that tend to be most recognizable are like the wise old man, the wicked witch, the motherly figure, the political pundit, the hero, the villain, the anti-hero, right? Hey, quick break in the action here. Hopefully you value the break in intensity. I know this is a pretty serious episode. Hey, there are a couple dates I want you to be aware of because our live events are coming to a close for this year. We are going to be in the UK. Specifically, we're going to be in Wales, Cardiff, on October 9th and 10th. We're going to be in Asheville, North Carolina, November 13th and the 14th. New York, 22nd of January and the 23rd, Toronto, Ontario, the 4th and the 5th of March of next year, and Austin, Texas, March 12th and 13th. These apprenticeships are open to people from all professions. There's not one of us who has communication mastered. There's not one of us that has leadership mastered, right? This takes a village. It takes all of us coming together, sharing stories, strategies, the latest research, and actually role-playing out these scenarios, right? Think of it as proactive perspective, guys. All of us have social issues we deal with in a wide variety of ways in work or our life. Come train them, come refine them, get around peers. This is a safe place. We normalize failure. The only people that don't belong are people that think they already have all the answers. For more, go to artofcoaching.com/apprenticeship, artofcoaching.com/apprenticeship. All right, back to the episode. Archetypes can also be associated with many kinds of behavioral and emotional patterns. The ones that tend to be most recognizable are like the wise old man, the wicked witch, the motherly figure, the political pundit, the hero, the villain, the anti-hero, right? People like characters like Venom or Loki of Marvel lore. If you think of movies, classic movies like The Breakfast Club, there's the jock, there's the nerd. Deeper look at heroes. I remember there was this article regarding Marvel movies by Beth Daly, and the rest of this is a quote from her. She said, even as we get older, role models in films can help us to think about what sort of person we want to be. When we are young, we typically enjoy stories where the goodies and the baddies are very clear. Happily, the goodies usually triumph and the baddies get their comeuppance, or they're transformed into goodies. But as we get older, our thinking develops, and we understand that the world is rarely black and white. And as a result, our tastes change, and we begin to enjoy ambiguous gray characters who may be baddies, but may have interesting motives that we can relate to. This links our stages of moral development. As young children, our sense of morality is tied to avoiding punishment and gaining rewards for being a good girl or boy. As we get older, we see morality as this agreement between people to maintain social order and everybody's rights. But we still also develop our own personal moral ideals. And those are based off our archetypical understanding of these things and how we identify and what, do we want to be this person or that person? I mean, kids grew up and wanted to be cowboys, and then other people wanted to be this and what have you. So this all fits well with the reality that oftentimes truth in storytelling would, emulate real life, especially when it comes to character development, both figuratively and literally. In many stories, you take people, you put them on a journey, they face hardship or peril, and in doing so, they're going to figure out who they really are. Now, the caveat there is if they actually want to. Okay, we're going down the archetype rabbit hole. I mean, if we're going to debate about this, we're going to go all the way in. We also think in archetypes every day. So, hey, Johnny is a clown. He always makes people laugh. Sonia is super outdoorsy. Katya is a foodie. Deontay is, stubborn. Right? Our views of success. We think the archetypical view of success in some people's mind is having money and cars. The archetypical view of success in other people's minds is being able to travel and have time to spend with loved ones. Do you see how archetypes play a role in our everyday life? It does it with environments too. The Silicon Valley type vibe of that business. Hey, that diner's a hole in the wall. I was on the show Drive-In Diners and Dives. I can't remember however many years ago, but we even think of there's this great Italian restaurant. It's one of those dark, dimly lit places that feels like it was an old mob hangout. We think of movie like this is, it's a great comedy. It's kind of like an action flick. Oh, it's a superhero movie. That's a horror movie. It's lots of jump scares and what have you. We use this general language to give people a taste of what might come, And it's very much tied to impression management. Now, mind you, and for some of you that are just getting familiar with my work, I omitted this. When I started to think about these things, why I even wrote a chapter on this is all the athletes I trained over the years, all the people I interacted with, you'd see commonalities. And when an intern would say, hey, what do we got today? Or what have you, or do we have a new person in the group? You eventually would kind of chat and say, hey, yeah, we have somebody that new joined today. Take it a little easy today. Don't overcorrect. They've kind of shown, they don't want to be challenged in this way or what have you, or, first day people can kind of have the jitters or what have you, right? This person's a little bit more defensive. This person's a little bit more open. This person likes this kind of instruction. And so you start using kind of general terms to just talk about general characteristics. These things were never, and I say as much in the book, this is why I get on the critics that read over it. Nobody has ever said you give somebody a name, and we'll go over some of the names in the book in a minute and some characteristics, and that's it. Nowhere in any of my work have I ever said, yep, you use the archetypes to label somebody, and that label is static, and it will never change, and they are the same way in every situation. So just take what I wrote in my book and go apply it to people blindly, and don't think about it ever again. Never once have I said it. Yet that's what some people would love for you to believe. And that's some people. So when we talk about how this is tied to impression management, and we have a whole podcast on this for those that really want to go down the rabbit hole, sociologist Irving Goffman, he wrote one of the first books devoted specifically to this area. And it goes to, as you can imagine, impression management is being able to showcase ourselves in a wide variety of ways, or, it's our ways of controlling what others think of us. And it's central to our working lives. I mean, people do this all the time. They do this all the time. And so he had written a great book. I believe it came out in like 1959 called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And he said, impression management involves attempts to establish the meaning or purpose of social interactions. Oh, it looks like a heated argument. Oh, those people are getting a fight. Oh, they're in love. And it guides our actions. It helps us anticipate, not predict, anticipate what to expect from others. He goes on to say impression management is a sort of mutual ritual that helps to smooth and control social relations and avoid embarrassment. And he said even actions which at first glance appear to be innocuous might actually be strategically calculated to show that social actor, that person, in the best possible light. He goes on to say people are performers. Their main task being playing many different roles to construct their social identity. And that's it, guys. Your self-image is tied to your behavior. I talk about one archetype in my book, the Wolverine. The Wolverine is somebody that, they tend to be a little bit distrusting. They tend to be a little bit more of a rogue. It's not like, there's anything wrong with them, but I mean, you can see, all right, is this person a little bit more complex? Are they brooding? Are they a little bit more individualist? Are they self-reliant? Do they seem super self-sufficient? Am I seeing that, they have a lot of distrust or fear or anger and what have you? I mean, that's something that I identify with. I spent a year of my life in the hospital, and I've been around, just like many of you have, some pretty untrustworthy, unsavory people in other circumstances. And I'm a pretty self-reliant guy. I like to rely on, I have no trouble asking for help now, not as much as I used to at least, but that's not how I always am. Right. But that can come off in my vibes sometimes. And so archetypes are very much our way of making sense of ourselves and the world around us and what have you. And, another quote from Yuval Noah Harari, author of Sapiens, he said, "We study history not so we can predict the future, but so we can widen our horizons." Well, it's the same thing with archetypes and why we need to be familiar with them. We don't study behavioral patterns because we think we can predict how people will behave in the future with absolute certainty. We should study these patterns so we can better understand ourselves, the adjacent possible choices of how we behave, and so we can better adapt and broaden our horizons. You know, sure, like somebody's going to display archetypal or archetypical personas, and you may get it wrong sometimes, and that's fine. It's a conversation starter. It's just something to say, hey, you know, I feel like this person. I talked to my wife Liz about this the other day. We were looking at candidates for a position for a contractor, and I was like, you know, I had this meeting. It just seemed this person was a little standoffish, as evidenced by X, Y, and Z. I said, you know, what was your interaction? She had a conversation about it, and you can see these kind of trends of behavior for this particular role. And so we start, you know, that's pretty interesting. And so we have to think of this stuff, and we have to be aware of it. And it's not hard to recognize differences, guys, you know, and it's dangerously lazy thinking if we go through life only seeking them out. But the reality is there are different behavioral patterns that people exist. So we just got to be realistic. So let's knock out some of these questions, right? That people say, talk about. Can you create a manual that tells me how to deal with each archetype? Now I'm going to talk to you about some of them in the book. In the book, we talk about the mouthpiece, the Wolverine, the free spirit, the manipulator, the underdog, the crusader, the skeptic, the hypochondriac, the leader, the novice, the politician, the specialist, the soldier, the royal, the technician. There's a million more, right? But like nobody's telling you that this is the answer to leadership. This is just one piece of understanding common patterns of behavior. Want me to explain a few? Happy to. The technician, right? Think of this person as somebody that excels in all things technical, right? Like in the world of sport, these people would get to the details of whatever their position entailed. These are people that can be very type A, can be, right? They love this. They're fascinated with deeper understanding and knowledge and mastery. They're very detail oriented. They're analytical. They're disciplined. You know, weaknesses, they can be perfectionistic. They can be inflexible. They can crumble under pressure because they put so much on themselves, right? And they can struggle in chaotic environments and what have you. And so you think about, all right, who do you know that is like that? What about the royal? The royal is a term we use for people that are entitled or show aspects of entitlement or superiority, right? They very much are motivated by social recognition, and they want to hide their weaknesses. You know, they have borderline narcissistic self-esteem. They're confident, competent. Guess what? That's not always a weakness, guys. We need people that are very competitive and very confident. You know, like, of course, I don't want somebody entitled around me at all time, but shoot, if I have to have brain surgery, I surely want somebody that thinks they're amongst the best as long as their skill can back that up. Right now, of course, all of these things exist on a dimensional scale. So if somebody, you know, royals they can have excessive pride. They can basically avoid activities in which they lack full confidence. They can be difficult to coach or guide in early years of the relationship because you've got to break down this facade. They just feel like they have to show themselves as I've got it all figured out. You have people like the soldier. They follow instructions. They're dutiful, right? They're resilient. They're disciplined. But sometimes they don't know when to stop. Sometimes they push beyond their limits, and that can risk their health and what have you. You think of, let's give you some more, the politician, smooth operator, right? These are people that are charismatic. They're stimulating. They're confident, but they can also be very manipulative in the bad sense of the term. They can be overly cunning, and, you know, they can try to do all kinds of things to create environments where they always have the upper hand. And of course, that's going to create situations where they stagnate because they're always trying to wheel and deal. They're always trying to get out of it, you know, and there's ways to deal with it. I mean, everybody knows this in their workplace. We have the novice. Who amongst you is an eager beaver, right? There's a new skill, you jump right in. You love this idea of rapid improvement, keeping up with your peers. You have this idea of like, hey, I just want to jump right in. And you're like, hey, time out. You know, there's some instruction, there's some patience, there's some protocols that we have to follow. We can't just throw you in the deep end there. And, you know, when you're dealing with folks like that, it's helpful to recall what it was like when you were a novice, being able to kind of provide ample instructions, but, you know, also give them room to fail. I'll talk about a couple more. One of the ones that we talk about a lot, or we talked about earlier, is the skeptic, right? These are people that, hey, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. They're going to question everything. They're analytical. They're cautious. They might be an active listener, but they're always waiting for you to mess up. Always. They're so hesitant and distrusting, and it's not our job to psychoanalyze, right? But you do have an opportunity to truly educate them, and a lot of times a skeptic, if you just show them, you don't tell, that's huge. I remember somebody said, hey, I avoided your work for a long time because I remember your book blew up and people talked about the archetypes, and I thought you were just going around the world talking about the beaver and the dog and this and that. And then, you know what? They actually started to get to know our work. They realized that was one chapter of one book of a piece and body of work that spans more than 10 years. And so when they started diving more deeply, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. This is part of this kind of overall ecosystem of what you have. And the reason you're doing it is to give people kind of these frameworks and saying, hey, we're going to make judgments. We're human beings. We're fallible. At least understand kind of what you're seeing at a higher level. Check this, kind of say, hey, does this fit with this? Does this fit with that? Does this person seem to exhibit these behaviors in all situations? Of course not. Nobody's like that unless there's a severe kind of spectral, autism disorder or what have you. I've had people that reach out and they say, hey, I just can't get across to this person. We find out that they're always meeting in, their office or some environment. And I said, well, you ever gone out and just shot hoops with them? This was in the NBA. Or you ever go out and just have lunch with them? You ever get off site? You ever meet them where they're the most comfortable? Of course, when they do that, different. Somebody tells me, oh, I have a problem athlete. Really? They're problematic all the time. At home, their family this. They're problematic all the time. Do they not show any essence of being open-minded? You never see them smile, right? Like, do you see it's actually more judgmental not to explore the archetypes because you're blindly just saying this person's this or this person's difficult. And I'm going to lay that out there. It is. If you're sitting there saying, and here's your little soundbite, this is what we'll play on Instagram and what have you. If you are somebody that thinks you are so good at communication and so good at reading people, yet you've never even had a framework to look at and check your bias, check the judgments that you make, check the labels, right? If you've never even gone into that, you've never assessed your own bias, you've never even gained a higher understanding of this, right? Like, you're a hypocrite. You are a hypocrite. And so I just always found it fascinating when somebody would say, oh, these archetypes, it seems like you're applying labels. 1, have you read the book? 2, have you done your homework? 3, do you understand the context? Right? 4, it sounds like you're making a judgment based on things that you haven't engaged with at a deeper level. You can't be a leader if you're going to do that. You can't be a leader if you're going to point the finger all the time without doing your homework. You got to think deeper. Now, shameless plug. In our online course, if this stuff is fascinating to you, if you're like, cool, the book interests me, great, that's on Amazon. We have an online course called Bought In. Now, don't be confused by some of the language. Of course, I talk about my background as a strength and conditioning coach. Just like some people out there in the leadership community from the military talk about their background as a Navy SEAL, or somebody might talk about their background running Apple, right? So you will see terminology that says athletes and coaches and what have you. These things apply across the board. We've had sales organizations and what have you buy this stuff. We've had people engage with it because archetypes are universal. We just talked about it. They've been universal. So yes, they apply to parents, colleagues, coworkers, you, colleagues, sport coaches. Now, getting on to the next piece. People aren't monoliths. You can't label them. We already covered that. We're not saying somebody is one or the other, or they're this or they're that. It's fluid. You might express archetypical characteristics of one kind in a certain setting. You better believe if I'm around a sketchy environment, I go straight Wolverine. I go into myself. If I hear somebody peddling BS, I might be skeptic, right? But if all of a sudden it's the holidays, I'm around friends and family and people that I love and people that want the best for me, right? You're going to be jovial, right? I'm more of a free spirit. I'm going to see the world with childlike wonder, right? I'm all about it. If somebody teaches me something new, and I'm going to take that novice view. We're constantly going back and forth with this. So somebody can be more than one. They always are more than one. Can you create a standardized questionnaire that helps us define this? No, because this is the case with most psychological studies, sociological studies, because of the Hawthorne effect. Just because people know that they're going to be watched or observed or what have you, or if they participate in a questionnaire, they're going to change their answers, they're going to change their behavior because they're wary of being judged, right? So it's too interdependent on, is that person telling the truth? Have you asked good questions? Are they reliable? Are they valid? All these pieces. And that's something you have to think about. So, you know, I hope this is making sense by now. Let's rewind everything. What we're saying is people behave in a wide variety of ways. People understand a wide variety of concepts, both simple and complex, based on archetypes. Our stories of good and evil, our stories of different various myths and legends, the way we talk about certain cultures, the way we talk about certain environments, the way we talk about certain people, the way that we see the world, right? An archetype is a mold, a model. It is not static. It is not static. The only thing, this could be soundbite number 2. The only thing you can count on with near 100% certainty is that people will behave in a myriad of ways depending on their perceptions of the environment they're in, the agendas of those they're interacting with, the nature of the request or what you're wanting from them, the timing of that request, the other people around them, all those pieces. And you've got to have a roadmap. If you struggle with people in any sense, and we all will throughout our lives, and you don't have a roadmap to better understand the complexities here, and you're not undergoing that training, that's problematic. And even after you assess all those factors, you're still going to have to consider the culture, how they were raised and plays a role. I gave this virtual presentation last night. If I did give you guys this sheet and I said, hey, here's how you deal with a Wolverine. Here you go. Right. And in the book, we do provide a lot of examples and bought in. We provide a lot of examples. You can find that at artofcoaching.com. We give suggestions, but let's say I gave just ironclad, nope, you should only do this. Well, imagine then, is that the case if this person's from Western Australia and then somebody else shows that kind of characteristic and they're in China and what have you, right? Like their perceptions of this stuff aren't going to be the same. You have to think of nurture and nature. You have to think about all these other things. You also should consider, you know, sometimes when coaches or leaders say, hey, I'm having trouble with this person or what have you, I'm like, all right, well, what have you tried? How do you think you're coming across? Have you asked them? Because you're sitting here trying to figure them out. Have you figured yourself out? Have you videotaped your interactions with consent? Have you asked for their opinion? Have you sought feedback? Have you sought feedback? So all of these variables, you know, serve useful tools and frameworks. You've got to think about this stuff. There's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to people. Nobody's ever suggested that. My organization nor me will ever suggest that, right? If somebody ever promises you this toolkit, this playbook, this whatever that will teach you how to interact with everyone with perfection all the time, my advice is to run. My advice is to run. The power lies in your ability as a coach, and I use that term synonymous with leader, to learn how to better identify, analyze, and adapt to variables that impact human performance. That is what the art of coaching means. That is what the art of coaching means. And more importantly, right, it's the true nature of mastery within any craft. And so you have to remember, whether it's my book, the resources, other things you guys study, research articles, right? Doing so, trying to achieve some form of mastery. We'll never master this craft in general because people are too complex, but it requires much more than the acquisition of information. You guys have to be committed to being an apprentice. You have to know that communication is a lifelong skill. It is a strategic and goal-directed enterprise. And it does not happen simply because you've said something. It does not happen simply because you're in some hierarchical position where you think somebody should listen to you. That's not how that works. That is not how that works. So listen, I know this turned in part storytelling, part rant, part a lot of things. I just hope the point's clear, guys. I hope that, you know, you seek out additional information. Right? My book, like I said, is on Amazon. We have a great course called Bought In for those of you that are strength coaches. It's fully CEU approved. Just go to artofcoaching.com, go to the online courses tab. It's right there, and just do the work. That's all I ask of you guys. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't go learn more about your field, whether it's coding or this or that or what have you, and then say, I'm not going to learn more about people. I'm not going to learn more about myself. I'm not going to challenge my own assumptions, right? And don't listen to anybody, by the way, humorous note here, that tries telling you, oh yeah, that book, it's just about this and this and this. No, guys, at the end of the day, it's about our perceptions and how we interact and how we become, take a broader view of human nature. So hope you appreciate this rant. Hope you took some value out of it. Make sure to fill out the reflection form. Those things are in the show notes, and make sure to stay up to date with what we're doing by joining our newsletter, artofcoaching.com/begin. Would love to hear from you guys. We put out a wide variety of information every month, and we'd love your feedback on this episode. All right, until next time, Brett Bartholomew, Art of Coaching, signing off.